Hello, and on the UK edition this week, we asked the simple question, what's cooking? Remember that debate or that tamasha of a debate through the Brexit campaign that post-Brexit we'll all eat better Indian food because then more trained chefs from India will be allowed to come in? Really? Let's hear what Mr. Philip Trott, partner handling immigration at the firm Wells and Braithwaite, has to say. Mr. Trott, we heard a great deal about this issue about migration of chefs through the campaign leading up to Brexit. What was that about? Just some spice to the side, or was there a substantive issue here?
Well, chefs have always been a controversial issue. The first point of controversy is that it could be seen as a source of primary migration to the UK, because if you have a chef who has a family at home in India, they may well be minded to bring in their family after they get their principal work permit.
So but that's anyone, not just chefs.
That's exactly. But if you think about our colonial history, we used to have free immigration from Commonwealth countries. Then life changed in 1973, so that at the time we joined the European Union, funnily enough, the rules in relation to migration changed significantly, so that you had to get a work permit for any particular job which was going to be processed in the United Kingdom. When the EU came along, the market became to a degree saturated by EU migrants, and the net migration statistics went from the tens of thousands up to 300 plus thousand. So in the run-up to the referendum in June last year, there were certain people in the Brexit campaign who said, well, if we cut off migration from the EU, maybe the government will be a little bit softer on chefs.
But how many of these 300,000 were chefs from India?
Well, tiny amount, a tiny number. But it was
not even a fraction worth trying to estimate. That's all, I suppose.
I would say not even a fraction that's worth trying to estimate. What we had.
But why is that an issue then?
Well, it became an issue to those people who had settled and they didn't, as migrants, and then they decided they didn't want to have any more people, and they hoped that they'd be able to get chefs or other Indian cooking people, may not be chefs, to be able to come and get work permits in the UK. So but I think it's a non-point. I think.
But the context is the number of Indian restaurants that have been closing for want of cooking to a satisfactory enough level due to a shortage of qualified chefs. And that restaurant business is, as Theresa May reminded us, worth about £4 billion a year. So there is a big economic issue here.
I think she shot herself in the foot somewhat, because if you're going to have somebody come into this country to work, the most important thing is that they are working to the appropriate standard, and the appropriate standard now it's measured by something called an NVQ level, and the NVQ level is 6, and that is an independent level measured by an independent body.
What is this NVQ level? Is this the points?
Well, it's called National Vocational Qualification 6.
Could it translate simply as points?
No, it's you get points for reaching NVQ level 6, and it's a non-governmental organisation that measures the points for any job, and broadly speaking, at NVQ 6, it's management level, and the chef NVQ level has been stagnant at NVQ 3 for a very long time.
Does that translate into income levels?
It does, in that the NVQ level individual has to be paid a minimum salary of £29,750.
That's NVQ 3.
That's NVQ 3 after the deduction of meals and accommodation. But
so what could it possibly cost the employer?
It could cost the employer around about £35,000 a year.
That's expensive for a chef, is it not?
I wouldn't profess to know what chefs earn, but it's a lot of money for a job which the employer might consider to be low skilled. So what we've got is NVQ3, minimum of £29,750, and the job is classified as something called a shortage occupation. The magic of a shortage occupation is that the post doesn't have to be advertised. So the restaurant says, well, we need a chef.
You can import without advertising here.
Yes, exactly.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, yes. And so if you say, I want a chef, you have to reach a certain NVQ level, and the NVQ level is 3, and if you reach that level, you've got to pay a certain amount of money, now which may well be out of the reach of a lot of employers. And on top of that, the restaurant cannot offer a takeaway service. So a takeaway service could be something as simple as Deliveroo, which is a system whereby you have to register, or it could be somebody saying, we've got a takeaway menu and we're going to stick the food in a taxi and we're going to deliver it to you.
So the takeaway is the basic stuff, the sort of thing that's assembled with ready-made sauces. You can do that as a quickie and anyone can do it and off you go. But I don't know how often you've eaten out, dined out Indian, but the kind of restaurants that will offer that much money to a chef are very few.
Few and far between, I would suggest.
Very few, and I don't think I know of any outside of central London. And within central London, I think there are just a handful. So really, I'm trying to understand why this debate arose. When Preeti Patel brought this up, how many restaurants was she talking about? How many chefs?
Well, I would say probably hundreds of restaurants and probably less than 1,000 chefs. I mean, I don't pretend.
That many, you think?
I don't pretend to have hard statistical evidence on that. All I can tell you is how the system operates, and we see on a regular basis restaurants shutting. And I do know from my own research that the concept of training a chef in the UK is a fairly slow process. We're looking at probably 5 years worth of training time.
Well, I mean, in India, we have leading institutes such as the Pusa Institute in New Delhi, and people who join the hospitality business and train for years and years. There's an element of formal training and then informal apprenticeship with chefs, and they become quality chefs. So you have some of the upmarket Indian restaurants employing those chefs. But clearly, what is also happening is that there is a demand now for quality Indian food and not just the assembled sauces. And for that, restaurants might want more chefs. With what freedom could they import them?
Well, I think if there is well, we already know there's a shortage of chefs. We do know that. The freedom would be linked to the type of restaurant they are and the salary they're going to be paying.
You think that should be lowered?
From a purely subjective point of view, if you can't find chefs in the UK, then yes.
But there's an immigration issue here, and that is the issue now.
Well, the immigration issue is, the immigration issue is, are there enough people out there? Because if you meet all the criteria and the restaurant meets the right criteria and they're not throwing on ready-made sauces and they haven't got a ready-made delivery service, then in principle, they should be able to get a work permit, in principle.
We heard from Preeti Patel, and there was a bit of a powwow with Keith Vaz through the campaign up to Brexit. What was that debate about?
Well, that debate was about the fact that we think there's not enough chefs in this country, and linked to that, we see Indian restaurants shutting. So,
given Brexit, we eat better Indian food, fundamentally?
Well, on all my travels around Europe, I never met a plethora of Indian chefs throughout the EU. In fact, quite the opposite. Countries are particularly protective about their own cuisine.
You know, we were talking about migration from the EU as a proportion of the total migration and in relation to the migration from non-EU countries. Through that debate of the Vas and Priti Patel level, there was a suggestion that you cut down migration from the EU and you could possibly have more migration from India, and that possibly could mean more chefs leading to better Indian food. Very remote sort of connection that was suggested, but that was the suggestion. Is there any validity to that suggestion?
You've been very vocal and frank in the use of the word possibly. There's a lot of possibilities in that.
A lot of possibilities.
A lot of possibilities in that, and I tend as a lawyer to deal in probables rather than possibles.
Yes, but I'm describing that argument.
Yes, I think
it was
the
an argument of the possibles.
Yes, I think it was a failed argument, simply because if you look around Europe, in my time in Italy, I don't think I saw one Indian restaurant. In my time in Poland, I've never seen an Indian restaurant. So the concept of bringing in lots of Indian skilled chefs from the EU, I think, is a complete myth.
Yes, that certainly is, and nobody was expecting that local Romanians would come and cook a naan bread here and do it to perfection, or something that is approaching perfection. No disrespect to the skills of those chefs. But we have a big political issue here, an immigration issue. You have the annual Curry Awards in Britain, and the last time Theresa May attended those, she spoke very warmly about the need for good curry, what a big business it is, £4 billion a year. And just a few months back, she sent a very warm message to the Curry Awards again as Prime Minister, but her policies have not been quite as warm as her words.
She's a vote catcher. Used to have Mrs. Thatcher, the milk snatcher. We've got Mrs. May, the vote catcher, because she's trying to appeal to the immigrant community.
Well, Brexit is Brexit, as Theresa May reminded us, but what will it mean next for chefs? Back on that after a very short break. Welcome back. So what next for fine Indian food in the UK? Post-Brexit, Mr. Trott again. What next, Mr. Trott?
Well, one would hope that the stark realisation of there being a chronic shortage of chefs will come into the field of vision of this government. They're already marked down as in a shortage occupation, and we will know within the next week whether there's going to be a parliamentary vote needed to remove this country from the EU. I think there's a bit of a moving target, I'd say.
You know, this is a very odd sort of a argument where we are mixing politics with issues of palate. Because when we think of Indian restaurants in the UK, most of them are in fact Bangladeshi owned. Now, it's not about the origin of the owners, it's about an association of the kind of food that is served. A lot of the Bangladeshi restaurant owners that I've spoken to say that, well, we must train here and recruit here. Now, that is politically a more receptive thought. I mean, the politics is more receptive to that thought. But do you think that that is a realistic way out for people to be trained here?
I think it's a solution, but you can never beat the homegrown talent, and the homegrown talent is probably in the Indian subcontinent.
Well, so you import from the Indian subcontinent, but there is surely an issue of principle here as well, and that is going to guide issues of policy. Will Britain be more open to migration from Commonwealth countries such as India? Because the chefs is almost the tip of the iceberg for that kind of potential openness.
I think it's a misnomer. The reason why I say that is we've had two conservative regimes over the last 7 years. The first one said they were going to reduce the net migration statistics down to tens of thousands, and 5 years on they failed, and they've repeated the same mantra in the second conservative regime, and they're still failing. In fact, Theresa May was the Home Secretary, and she has a lot of political egg on her face because she failed to do it. She's failed to do it twice now, and immigration has always been a hot potato. You've got institutions wanting to employ people. You've got conservative newspapers ready to publish anti-immigrant headlines at the drop of a hat, and you've got, I think, a very difficult political thing to say, but quite a racist population in this country, where out of the big cities, migration is seen as a dirty word, even though people like to have a curry on a Friday night. They may not want to have foreigners as their neighbours.
Theresa May went to India, and India was the first country she visited outside of the EU as Prime Minister, and a lot was expected of it. For a start, I didn't hear her say anything about chefs, in line with all that she has said at the Curry Awards, which is the major event for that industry in Britain. She in fact said that their immigration policy, meaning the UK's immigration policies, are quite right. She spoke of tightening migration, the migration regime. So this does not seem to sit squarely with some suggestions made through the campaign that, well, if we are cutting down on trade with the EU, never mind, we will expand deals with countries such as India. You don't quite see that happening, you say?
Well, I think she was there on a trade mission, and she didn't want to say anything too nasty towards her hosts. That would be my take on what went on. She's single-handedly tried to make immigration to the UK harder for students, which, bearing in mind the size of the student economy, I think is foolhardy. But she's looking for votes, and she's wanting to make sure she doesn't get any bad headlines in the Conservative press.
Well, 4 billion a year is the curry house market, to put it simply. The international students is 12 billion a year. And if doors close on one front, then out of consistency, they might be closed on the other. You can win the immigration argument, but what if you lose the economic position?
I think she'll have a big mess on her hands, just as she will over Brexit, I think.
Do you think Brexit will inevitably happen?
I think
we've seen the referendum, we've seen the Supreme Court verdict, but do you think really?
Well, we haven't had the Supreme Court verdict yet, and that's coming either the end of this week or the end of next week.
But they have said that they will not negate the referendum.
They won't negate the referendum, but if you need a vote in Parliament, and there are a number of MPs who do not follow the party whip, and there is a disunited Conservative Party and a Labour Party which is not exactly singing from the same hymn sheet, it may well be that the referendum outcome won't be ousted, but Parliament may vote against the outcome of the referendum.
Well, then it's a conflict between two kinds of democracies. A people's democracy and a parliamentary democracy, that really becomes a very fundamental question of what Britain pursues and adopts as its democratic model. But short of a situation where Parliament negates the referendum and doesn't appear likely that it can or will, assuming Brexit goes ahead, as Theresa May said, where does the question of migration stand with countries such as India?
I think India will not be a specific target.
Yeah, as example.
But as example, I think they're going to harden immigration category by category. And there's going to be a highly skilled level which is going to get a free pass, and the lower skilled levels are probably going to suffer as a result of it.
So where do chefs come in then?
Chefs are lower skilled. They are perceived as being lower skilled.
Highly paid but lower skilled?
Well, if you're
relatively highly paid.
If you compare them to bankers,
yes,
or lawyers.
No, let's not talk of bankers and lawyers. With due respect, are unreal people. But I'm talking about working classes such as me as the standard.
Yeah, it's very, very highly paid. I mean, the average pay in the United Kingdom is £26,000 a year.
Yes.
And the chefs are upwards of £29,750, probably after the payment of expenses, up to £35,000-40,000.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So this immigration has always been a highly political subject matter, and I think it will remain so forever and a day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trott, for speaking to us, and we'll continue that conversation one day over an Indian meal. Looking forward to meeting you again.
Thank you.
Who's going to cook that dinner and how is the big question. It's not the biggest question in Brexit, but in a business generating £4 billion a year, not that small either. Let's see when the proof of the pudding comes. We'll discover that too together here on News 18.